Did I ever tell you about the $5,000 water bill that I had? My name is Chatto, and I've been a landlord for over 25 years, and I wanted to have a quick chat with Chatto about utilities. So, quick story time. So, actually, my first property that I purchased, the one 25 plus years ago, the 3-unit that I purchased and I lived in and rented out the other 2 units, that was a property where at one point I got a $5,000 water bill. This was after a couple years of ownership, and I had since moved away, and I get the bill in the mail, and I still couldn't believe my eyes when I open up this bill. And again, the water bill is usually a couple $100, nothing crazy. And this is early 2000s, right? So this was $5,000, unfortunately, was a lot more back then, and it's still a lot of money today. But I open up this water bill, and I'm like, $5,000? There's got to be a mistake. So at this point, I'm actually a couple hours away from the property. I moved to another state, and I call up, and the lady, and it's a small town. The lady in phone, yeah, I figured you'd be giving me a call when you got that. Like, you couldn't maybe give me a heads up so I could try to figure out what it is sooner. But long story short, I got this huge water bill. I'm like, okay, what do I do now? I run up to the property 3 hours away. I had to take a whole day. I drive up to the property and try to figure out what's going on. What could possibly cause a $5,000 water bill? And I get into the basement, and I hear water running. I'm like, what is that? There's water running. And long story short, after playing around and eventually figuring it out, I found a water shutoff, and I turned it, and it stopped. The sound stopped, and I had to do a little research. What's going on? So when I first purchased the property, actually, there was like this weird shed in the backyard, and it was past my property line. It wasn't even on my property. There was this weird little shed, and then eventually they built new houses back there. They knocked the shed down. Okay, cool. I didn't think anything of it. So what happened was I had a tenant move in, and I had it set up where the tenants had washers and dryers. There's a spot for each tenant in the basement to have a washer and dryer. And one of the tenants moved their washer and dryer in, and they shut off what they thought was the water for the washing machine. And apparently that old structure that was behind my house, not even on my property line, had a water line run to it from my house that powered the water, that gave the water utility to that property behind, which is really weird. And when they turned that water on, that water just went right through that pipe into the house that's no longer there and just went right into the ground. So literally $5,000 for a valve that got turned on to a mystery pipe that went nowhere. So that being said, that really was a wake-up call for me, and that was the whole kind of inspiration for this video about utilities. And thinking about it, right, that was a 3-unit building. I probably should have charged these tenants, if they want to use a laundry, this is how much it's going to cost, because you're using electricity, you're using water, right, and all that stuff costs money. You can have a washer and dryer, there's a hookup in the basement, probably going to charge you for it. I didn't think about that back then. Now I look at it with a different eye. That would have been a great thing to do. Anyway, so the ins and outs of utilities, that's kind of what I want to chat with Chatto about today. So the first question is, who pays? We found that traditionally on a single family property, right, you know who's using all the electricity, you know who's using all the water, and we have the tenants cover their utilities. So the tenants pay their own water, their tenants pay their own electricity, and I don't necessarily want to say, well, they use whatever they use, because at the same time, you want to make sure you're helping them to make sure they're not wasting water and wasting utilities. For example, if they have a water leak, right, if they have a toilet that's running, let us know. Let's get that toilet to stop running. It's going to cost you money. And if there's a leak, let us know. Let's get the leak fixed so that there's not costing you money. And that's gives them a better ability to pay rent on time, right? If they're not wasting money on water. But you want to know who pays. Secondly, you want to know how it works in your area. meaning certain areas, and every area is different. But for example, some of the towns that I work in, water is considered a lienable item. So if you have a tenant move in and the tenant puts the water in their name and they don't pay the water for a year, they move out, that water bill sticks to the property. And if it doesn't get paid, someone can pay that water bill, like pay the lien, like the water company will get a lien against the property. Someone can buy that lien and eventually foreclose on the property if you don't get it handled. So it's good to know that type of thing. So in that particular town, in those areas where that water is a lienable item, we keep that bill in our name and we bill the tenants. So every month that bill comes in, we pay it because it's a lienable item, and then we add it to the tenant's ledger and we send them a copy of the bill and say, hey, this is the water usage, this is what you used, pay it with your next rent. So how is it billed? Is it lienable? Is extremely important. Some places, the utility company will do that. Some places it won't. It depends on local municipalities. But that's one thing to know. And if it is something that's lienable, it is something you need to really be on top of. Also, I'll tell you another quick little story. One of the local municipalities that we work in that has the water company, they make it extremely difficult to change the address on a bill. Completely ridiculous. You gotta give them your entire life story and your ID and just like all this paperwork you need to fill out just to change the address. So that being said, when we changed offices at one point, in one property we didn't get changed, and we didn't realize it. So the tenant pays the water, we pay the water, and then the tenant pays us. And we didn't get a bill. We didn't even realize it, right? Because we got a bunch of properties, just didn't catch one bill we weren't getting until the tenant calls us up and say, hey, I don't have any water. So eventually the water company shut off the water, and we had to run down and get it paid and get it handled. Now we're in a position where like, hey, you owe $800 because you haven't paid water in a year. And we gave them time to pay it back. But it's always good to make sure that you are getting your utility bills, however it is. If you're getting them via email, make sure you're getting them. If you're getting them, make sure you have the address right. Make sure you're getting those bills and that they're getting transferred onto the tenant. Next thing to think about with utilities is turning off, turning on utilities and turnovers. And what I mean by that is, and I talked about it earlier, if you have a property, especially in the winter, as we were talking about this with the frozen pipes, it's winter time and a tenant shuts the utilities off, the heat goes off and now the pipes freeze and it becomes a whole big thing. And in certain areas, it's really hard to get the utilities turned back on. If there's gas, certain gas companies, they're not going to turn the gas and electric back on until they send somebody out to the property to make sure that all the pilots are lit, that there's no gas leaks and that type of thing, which can hold you up potentially a week before getting utilities back on. And I've had that happen in certain areas. So just make sure you're aware of how it works as far as them shutting it off and them turning it back on. I know it's changed in our market a lot. It used to be that if a tenant moved out, they would leave it on until the next person put it in their name. And then they kind of changed it. When a tenant moved out, they would literally shut it off within a day or two. So, you need to know how it works in your area, and you want to keep the utilities on in your properties. I already talked about if it's a lienable item. The next thing I want to talk about, right, when we talk about actually who pays, and I was saying like in a single family property, it's really the tenant pays for everything. But now in a multifamily, it's a lot of times a little different. Usually there's, at least in what I've noticed, and again, it probably varies by area, but most multifamily properties have one water meter. There's one water meter. You don't know who's using what water. And you need to look at your local laws and how you might be able to bill that out to the tenants. I know some people like do calculations based on square footage, calculations based on the number of people living there. And then they kind of divide it up that way and bill the tenants. And that's something you might be able to do. Some people put sub-meters in, which that can cost a lot of money, but now you know exactly how much water each person's using. And the other thing is like sometimes maybe just charging a fee to the tenants. And that's how we actually ended up working with our properties, is having a water fee. And it really kind of, number one, it keeps in their mind that they're paying a portion of the water. So it helps them not to waste water. And then number two, it helps us offset some of the water charges. It's nowhere near what the actual water costs, but it does help, and it's a way to kind of keep in the tenant's mind. And then I think we also talked about like when setting up expectations with the tenants, especially in multifamily properties where you pay the utilities. Like, hey, if the toilet's running, let us know. We're going to come out and get it fixed. If there's a leak, let us know. We're going to come out and get it fixed. Whereas with a single family tenant who's paying the water, we want to get that fixed for them ASAP as well. But if they don't tell you about it, it costs them money. In a multifamily, if they don't tell you about it, it costs you money. So just keep that in mind, that you set those expectations with the tenants. Especially now when you visit or have your handyman out at your multifamily properties, maybe it's a good idea to have him take a look at the water meter and make sure it stops. Even in a multi-unit property, the chances are of people using water, it's going to stop while the handyman's there, and he can make sure that that meter stops and nothing's like leaking. So that's another thing to keep in mind whenever you have an issue with a high water bill, is that, hey, have the tenants check and like, hey, shut off all your water, go into the basement, look at the water meter, and make sure it's not moving. And that's something you have your handyman do when he's at the multifamily properties, just to confirm that there's no leaks. Usually, and again, the same thing applies for electric as well with the multifamilies versus the single families, but a lot of the multifamilies may have separate electric meters, may have separate gas meters, may have separate heat, right? So all that things come into play and are things you need to think about when dealing with utilities. And the other thing to consider, and we haven't really got overly involved in it, but I am under the understanding that there are devices you can attach to your water lines, to your meters, that will monitor and be able to let you know, like, something's not right. There's been some kind of change in usage that we need to be aware of. And then that could give you some type of notification. Sometimes they're hooked up to the internet and it's a smart thing. And I don't know too much about that, but those do exist. And like, if I had something like that on my property, where I had the $5,000 water bill, probably would have saved me a lot more money than it would have cost. Although I don't know if they were as available back then, 25 years ago, but they are available now. So that's just another thing to keep in mind. So hopefully this video was of value to you. I appreciate you guys hanging out for another 12, 13 minutes here, and look forward to having you guys like, comment, and subscribe, because apparently that helps the algorithm. And again, I appreciate you guys watching another episode of Chat with Chatto. Have a good one.